50 years of building legacies shattered when my son traded heirloom furniture for a tech fantasy. Now, I'm trading my freedom for a chance to save the only thing he left behind. The smell of sawdust and aged leather is the scent of my life. It clings to my skin, my clothes, even my memories. For 50 years, I've run The Sturdy Joint, a bespoke furniture workshop that my grandfather started with a single hand plane and a stubborn refusal to use cheap particle board. We build things that last, things you can pass down. I suppose that's why the splintering of my own family felt so ironic. It was the summer Mark turned 23. He'd graduated college with honors, a degree in business administration, the kind that costs more than the entire inventory we had in 1985. He stood in the middle of the shop floor, the late afternoon sun cutting through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the lathe. He wasn't looking at the cherry wood I was shaping, he was looking right through it. "Dad," he said, and the way he said it, clinical, detached, was like hearing a stranger critique my life's work. "This isn't scalable." I stopped the machine. The sudden silence was loud. "Scalable? Mark, we make heirloom pieces. We don't sell fast food tables." "Exactly. You're fighting the tide. Millennials don't want oak dressers that cost 6 months' rent. They want experiences. They want digital solutions. This," he gestured around the workshop, taking in the heavy machinery, the racks of hand tools, the smell of linseed oil. "This is quaint. It's a hobby that pays the bills. Barely." My chest tightened. I'd poured my blood into this place. My wife, bless her soul, used to bring me coffee out here before dawn. I taught Mark how to hold a chisel before he could tie his shoes. "It's a legacy, son. It's craft." He scoffed, pulling out his phone, the omnipresent shield of the modern age. "Legacy doesn't pay for my student loans, Dad. I've got an offer." A tech startup in Austin. They're focused on AI-driven inventory management for luxury retail. It's disruptive. It's where the future is. I remember the cold weight of that moment. He wasn't asking permission. He was delivering his resignation. He didn't just want to leave the shop. He wanted to erase the very idea of the shop from our shared future. "So, that's it?" I asked, my voice barely a rasp over the hum of the ventilation system. 50 years of tradition, you toss it aside for an algorithm? "I'm not tossing it aside, Dad. I'm evolving. You should consider it. You could digitize your order intake, maybe offer some online tutorials. Get out, Mark." The words came out harsher than I intended. He flinched, but there was a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He thought he was winning. He packed the small duffel bag he'd brought, nodded curtly at me, and walked out the main bay door, leaving the scent of expensive cologne mixing sickeningly with the sawdust. He never looked back. For the next 7 years, we exchanged Christmas cards that felt increasingly hollow. He became Marcus Vance Digital Strategist, posting curated photos of himself in sleek glass offices, shaking hands with people I didn't recognize. I kept the Sturdy Joint running, just me and my aging foreman, old Ben, sanding away the years. We survived the recessions. We adapted where we could, but the new generation simply wasn't interested in things that didn't crash when you dropped them. Then the silence changed. The Christmas cards stopped arriving entirely. His LinkedIn profile went dark. The number I had for him went straight to voicemail, a full mailbox recording. I tried my ex-wife, his mother, but she just sighed and said, "He's probably just rebranding, Arthur. Don't worry your old head about it." But I was worried. A man who builds his entire identity around being disruptive doesn't just go quiet unless something truly catastrophic has happened. It was a Tuesday, late October, when the unmarked sedan pulled up the gravel driveway. It was pouring rain, the kind that turns our yard into mud soup. A woman got out, impeccably dressed in a severe charcoal suit, holding an umbrella that looked too expensive to get wet. She didn't knock at the front door. She walked straight into the workshop, tracking mud onto the concrete floor near the bandsaw. "Mr. Davies?" she asked, her voice sharp like breaking glass. "I'm Ms. Albright, legal counsel. I need to speak with you urgently regarding Marcus Vance." My heart hammered against my ribs. What happened to my son? Ms. Albright didn't offer condolences or softness. Marcus's venture, Nexus Flow Solutions, dissolved 3 weeks ago, spectacularly. It turns out his AI-driven inventory management was largely illusory, reliant on speculative funding that dried up overnight when his key partnership collapsed. I stared at the mud drying on the floor. Illusory. "He's not in jail," she continued, consulting a thin file, "but he's facing severe litigation. He leveraged everything, his apartment, his savings, and critically, his investment capital, which was significantly tied up in unsecured debt." "Debt? What kind of debt?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "The kind that demands immediate, substantial collateral. He made some very high-risk personal guarantees to bridge the final funding gap before the SEC got involved." She looked up at me, her gaze piercing. "Mr. Davies, Marcus has defaulted on unsecured loans totaling nearly $400,000. I felt dizzy. That was a fortune to me. That was a new workshop, 5 years of profit. I don't have that kind of money. I run a woodworking shop. "I'm aware of your modest operation, sir. However, when Marcus was attempting to secure the final bridge loan, he listed assets. Specifically, he listed the deed to the property where the sturdy joint operates." My hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white. "He did what? That land is in my name, my father's name before me." "He listed it as contingent collateral, anticipating quick repayment. Unfortunately, the creditors are not waiting for him to reestablish his career. They are foreclosing. They want the property by the end of the month to liquidate assets." She tapped a pristine nail on the file cover. "They are sending a representative tomorrow morning to assess the value of the premises, including the structures and equipment. They want to know what they are seizing." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "If you want to prevent the seizure of your life's work, Mr. Davies, you need to find $400,000, or you need to present a counteroffer they cannot refuse by 9 a.m. tomorrow." The rain outside seemed to intensify, beating against the corrugated iron roof like an angry fist. I watched the expensive sedan disappear down the muddy track, leaving me alone with the ghostly shapes of my dormant machinery. $400,000. There was only one way I could conceivably raise that kind of capital, a way I swore I would never touch again, a way that involved digging up the past. I walked over to the heavy old safe bolted into the back corner of my office, the one that hadn't been opened since my father died, the one that held the one thing he insisted must never be touched unless the family truly faced ruin. I turned the heavy brass dial, listening to the familiar grating click of the tumblers falling into place, and pulled the heavy steel door open, revealing not cash, but a small velvet-lined box. Inside, resting on faded silk, was the single enormous emerald necklace my father had inherited from his own estranged, wealthy aunt. A piece so valuable, he'd always called it the family curse, and insisted it stay locked away until the very final breath of the Davies line. I lifted the cold, glittering stone, realizing that saving my shop meant selling off a piece of my own history. But what truly chilled me was the note tucked beneath where the box sat, a hastily scrawled napkin from Mark, dated 2 years ago, saying he'd been in town, needed emergency cash, and that he'd taken a small loan from the safe, signed with an IOU for $5,000. The emerald felt impossibly heavy in my palm, radiating a cold that seemed to seep directly into my bones. It wasn't the weight of the gemstone itself, but the weight of the secret, the weight of my father's dire warnings ringing in my ears. "This stone is poison, Arthur. It brings ruin, not fortune. $5,000. Mark had stolen from the safe years ago, a petty theft masked by the grand facade of his burgeoning tech empire. It was a betrayal layered upon a betrayal. He hadn't just dismissed my trade. He had taken from the emergency reserve my father had set aside for catastrophes, a reserve he never told me existed until he handed me the key on his deathbed. I closed the safe, the heavy click echoing in the sudden silence of the workshop. The clock on the wall showed 7 p.m. The representative from the creditors would be here in 14 hours. I had one desperate play left. I grabbed my old flip phone, the one I kept only for emergencies, and dialed the only number I hadn't tried for 7 years. His mother's direct line, the one she used when she truly needed me to listen. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight. "Arthur? Is everything all right?" "No, Helen, nothing is all right. Mark's company imploded. The bank is foreclosing on the shop unless I produce $400,000 by morning." There was a long, sharp intake of breath on the other end. "What? Arthur, I haven't heard from him in months. I assumed he was just being difficult." "He was being fraudulent, Helen. And worse, he leveraged my property. But that's not why I'm calling you. I know he took money from the safe years ago, $5,000. I found his IOU. A pause, heavy with implication. "Arthur, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that if Marcus is in real trouble, the kind that involves unsecured debt and predatory lenders, he might have gone to you for help before he burned every bridge. Did he ask you for money recently? Did he mention anyone specific he owed?" Helen sighed, a sound full of maternal exhaustion. "He called me 3 months ago, Arthur. Said he was restructuring his portfolio and needed a temporary loan of $50,000. He promised he'd pay it back in 2 weeks. "And did you give it to him?" "I didn't have it, Arthur. You know my pension is modest. I told him I couldn't help. He got angry, said I didn't believe in him, and hung up. He sounded desperate even then. He said if I didn't help, he'd have to make a deal with devils." Devils. That term sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through me. Mark was many things, but he wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a flashy salesman who believed his own hype. He wouldn't willingly involve himself with real sharks unless he was drowning. "Helen, I need you to check his old business records, anything he hasn't wiped. Look for correspondence with anyone named Blackwood or Sterling Capital. If you find anything, text it to me immediately." I hung up and started pacing the sawdust-strewn floor. $400,000. The necklace was easily worth twice that, maybe more, but selling it legally would take weeks, appraisals, jewelers. I needed cash now. I needed leverage. My eyes landed on the heavy machinery. The original lathe, a beautiful, monstrous cast-iron piece from 1920. It was worth a fortune to a collector, but selling it would cripple the shop's immediate production capacity, even if I managed to stop the foreclosure. I called Ben, my foreman. He answered sleepily, "It's Arthur." "Ben, can you meet me at the shop in an hour? Bring the titles for your truck and that old shed out back." "What's going on, boss? You sound like you saw a ghost." "Worse, Ben. I saw my son's future, and now it's trying to steal my present." When Ben arrived, looking rumpled and concerned, I laid out the situation, omitting the part about the emerald, of course, focusing only on the immediate threat of foreclosure. Ben, a man who had seen me through 3 recessions, didn't blink. He'd worked here since he was 17. This shop was his second home, too. "We can't let them take it, Arthur," he stated simply, "but $400,000. We're talking about pulling equity out of thin air." "We aren't pulling it out of thin air, Ben. We're pulling it out of the woodwork." I walked to the far corner of the shop, where a massive, custom-built wall unit sat unfinished, a commission for a notoriously demanding client, Senator Reynolds, due next month. It was the most expensive piece I'd ever contracted. "I have a plan, but it's reckless. We take the necklace to a specialized private buyer tonight, a pawnbroker with 0 questions asked. We borrow against it, just enough to cover the debt, use the leverage to buy time, and I pay it back when I sell the senator's piece next month. We put a rush on it." Ben looked skeptical. "You want to rush Senator Reynolds? That man is a viper. If that unit isn't perfect, he won't just sue. He'll bury us in paperwork until we starve. We'll make it perfect, but right now, we need to survive the night. We spent the next hour loading the emerald, now wrapped in oily shop rags, into my beat-up pickup truck. I told Ben to stay and guard the place, that I would be back before dawn with the money or a binding agreement. The private buyer Ben recommended, a shadowy figure known only as Silas, was located in a derelict industrial park across the river. The air there smelled of stagnant water and desperation. Silas's office was a single bare room above a shuttered warehouse. He was thin, pale, and his eyes darted everywhere, confirming every instinct my father ever had about the stone. I presented the necklace. Silas held it under a harsh desk lamp, his breath hitching slightly as the emerald caught the light. He didn't haggle much. He knew what he had. "This is museum quality, Davies. Too hot for the open market." "I don't need the market, Silas. I need liquidity. I need $300,000 by 8 a.m. I will repay you $450,000 in 30 days. Ben's house and my truck title as collateral for the loan." Silas smiled, showing teeth too sharp for his face. Generous. "But I don't deal in 30 days for stones like this. I deal in immediate acquisition. I'll give you $250,000 cash right now. No interest. No collateral needed for repayment. Consider it a purchase, not a loan." My heart sank. $250,000 was $150,000 short. It wouldn't cover the debt. It would only give me enough cash to appease the initial assessment team tomorrow, maybe buy me a week, but the creditors would still seize the property once they saw the shortfall. "No," I said firmly, pushing the box back across the desk. "I need $400,000, or I walk. This stone will end up in the hands of someone who asks fewer questions than you do." Silas leaned back, considering. He picked up a worn manila envelope from his desk drawer and slid it toward me. "You are a stubborn man, Davies. I respect that. Perhaps you should look inside this before you leave." "What is it?" "It's information about your son." My blood ran cold again. What about Mark? "He didn't just default on inventory management software, Mr. Davies. He was running a classic pump-and-dump scheme using shell corporations linked to a very specific organization, an organization that doesn't take kindly to people who walk away with their seed money. They don't care about your workshop, Arthur. They care about finding Marcus." He tapped the envelope. "They believe Marcus fled with close to $1 million. They're looking for him now. If you take my $250,000 and pay off the creditors, you clean the slate on the shop. But the organization looking for Marcus? They'll assume you helped him hide, or that you know where he is. They won't send a lawyer tomorrow, Arthur. They'll send muscle." He looked me dead in the eye. "You have 30 minutes to decide. Take the $250,000 and risk being hunted by people who view foreclosure as a soft punishment, or refuse and watch the creditors take the property, but perhaps keep your head attached." I stared at the envelope, my mind racing between the structural integrity of my workshop and the physical integrity of my own body. $400,000 to save my business, or $250,000 to save my life, knowing that even with the money, the real trouble, the kind that smells of violence, was about to walk through my workshop doors looking for my prodigal son. I reached out and grabbed the envelope, the paper rough against my fingertips, and as I did, the overhead light in Silas's office flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a terrifying second. When the light stuttered back on, Silas was gone, and the heavy steel door of the office was slowly creaking open, revealing not the empty hallway I expected, but the silhouette of a man standing there, holding something long and dark in his hand. The silhouette in the doorway was too still, too broad to be Silas making a casual exit. The darkness played tricks, but the object in his hand was undeniably real. It reflected the stuttering overhead bulb with a dull metallic sheen. It looked like the barrel of a shotgun. Panic, sharp and icy, finally cut through the fog of confusion and fear. I scrambled backward, knocking my chair over, the sound echoing loudly in the sudden silence. "Silas?" I called out, my voice strained. The man didn't speak. He took one slow, deliberate step into the room. Now I could see him better. Enormous, wearing heavy work boots and a cheap, dark nylon jacket that did nothing to hide the bulk underneath. He wasn't a lawyer or a debt collector. He was exactly what the envelope had warned me about. I fumbled frantically on the desk for the emerald necklace, intending to throw it at him as a distraction, but my hand only found the manila envelope. I shoved it into my jacket pocket. "Look, friend," I said, trying to inject authority into my voice, "I don't know who you are, but I'm just here to negotiate a loan. You've got the wrong building." The man finally moved his head slightly, and I saw his face, or rather, the edge of it. Cold, set features, eyes that seemed accustomed to looking at the world through a narrow scope. He raised the weapon slowly, deliberately leveling it at my chest. "Mr. Vance's father?" His voice was a low rumble, completely devoid of emotion, like gravel shifting. "We were told Mr. Vance might have left a message here for his creditors." "Mark isn't here," I insisted, hands raised slightly, palms open in a universal sign of surrender that felt deeply humiliating in my own shop setting. "He hasn't been here, I swear it. We know about the debt, Arthur, but we don't care about the $400,000 in unsecured liabilities. That's the legal mess. We care about the other debt." He gestured vaguely with the weapon. "The seed capital. Marcus took something that belongs to people who prefer tangible assets over promissory notes." It was the organization Silas had mentioned. They weren't interested in the shop or the foreclosure. They were interested in the $1 million Mark allegedly skimmed from their operation. "I don't have his money," I pleaded. "I haven't spoken to him in years." The man took another step, closing the distance. I could smell something metallic, oil and sweat. "Silas gave you a choice. He's already gone. You should have taken the $250,000 and walked away clean. Now, you've chosen the hard way." He was right. Silas hadn't just offered me a deal. He'd offered me an escape route and an urgent warning. By refusing the lower payout, I had signaled that I was trying to keep the collateral, the emerald necklace, which was likely the organization's true target, not just the money Mark stole. "What do you want?" I whispered. "We want the primary collateral Marcus offered us for his venture, the one that wasn't traceable through the SEC filings. We were told he kept it with the only person in the world he still trusted enough to hide something valuable." He paused, his gaze sweeping over my worn leather belt, my faded work shirt, and finally resting on my jacket pocket where the manila envelope containing the information about the necklace, and the necklace itself, was stashed. "We want the green stone, Arthur." My mind snapped back to the workshop, to Ben waiting nervously, to the senator's deadline looming in the morning. If I handed over the emerald, I lost the only bargaining chip I had against the foreclosure team. I'd be left with nothing but a rapidly collapsing business and a trail of violence leading straight back to my front door. If I fought, I might lose my life right here in this grimy room. "I don't have it on me," I lied, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's back at my shop." The man seemed to consider this, lowering the shotgun perhaps half an inch. "That's unwise. We prefer immediate payment." "If you come with me now, I can show you," I pressed, desperately trying to buy time to get back to Ben and formulate a defense or an escape. "It's heavy. It needs to be handled carefully." The enforcer hesitated, clearly weighing the risk of an unknown location against the certainty of a confrontation here. He spoke into a wrist communicator, his voice low and rapid in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded Slavic, guttural. He snapped the device shut. "Fine, but you lead." "If you try anything, Arthur, I promise you, you will be the first piece of furniture I break down on your own workbench." We left the room, descending the rickety metal stairs. As we reached the ground floor, the pervasive smell of stagnant water and decay gave way to a sudden, sharp scent of fresh gasoline. The enforcer stopped dead, peering through a cracked window facing the street. "Damn it," he cursed under his breath. "We've got company." Outside, parked haphazardly across the mouth of the alley, was a black utility van, its engine idling menacingly. 2 more large figures were emerging from the driver's side, also carrying firearms. They weren't Silas's people. They were clearly not interested in negotiating. The creditors, I realized aloud, the absurdity of the situation almost making me laugh. They moved faster than expected. The first man spun around, shoving me violently against the wall. Which set of devils are these? The ones looking for your son or the ones looking for your property? "Both, maybe," I gasped, tasting rust from the metal siding. "They just converged." The enforcer didn't wait for clarification. He leveled his shotgun at the doorway. "You wait here, Arthur. If those are the bank's lawyers, they're about to learn what happens when you try to foreclose on someone else's debt." But before he could fire, a deafening screech of tires ripped through the air as the black utility van suddenly accelerated. Not toward the front door, but directly toward the warehouse wall. Its heavy bumper aimed right at the weakened support pillar next to the stairs. The sound of tearing metal and shattering concrete erupted, followed by a cascade of debris, dust, and shattering glass as the building groaned under the impact, the entire structure beginning to tilt precariously toward us. The impact was deafening, a gut-wrenching symphony of destruction that pulverized the silence of the industrial park. Concrete dust, thick and choking, exploded outward, instantly blinding me. I heard the enforcer shout something unintelligible, a sharp bark of alarm, followed by the unmistakable heavy thud of his body hitting the ground, somewhere nearby. I squeezed my eyes shut, instinctively curling into a ball against the damp cinder blocks, shielding my head with my arms as the structure above us protested violently. The smell of gasoline, momentarily intense from the crash, was replaced by the acrid odor of ruptured hydraulic fluid and burning rubber. When the initial tremor subsided, I risked opening my eyes. The air was thick, shimmering with dust, making everything look sepia-toned and unreal. I couldn't see 5 feet. The stairway where the enforcer had stood was gone, replaced by a jagged heap of broken wood and pulverized brick. "Hey," I croaked, spitting dust. "Where are you?" Silence. Then a faint, muffled cough from somewhere in the gloom where the enforcer had been standing. He was alive, buried under less debris than the entrance. I clawed my way out from under the overhang just as a flashlight beam, harsh and focused, cut through the haze from the gaping hole the van had made. The beam swept across the floor, illuminating broken masonry, then settled directly on me. "There he is!" a voice bellowed from the van. It wasn't the gravelly voice of the first man. This was high-pitched, aggressive. "Get the old man! We need to secure the premises before the police arrive." The bank's assessors had clearly decided that appraisal required bulldozing the entrance. I didn't wait to see what they intended to secure. My only thought was getting back to the pickup truck, getting the necklace, and getting back to Ben before this entire chaotic scene devolved into a literal firefight. I bolted toward the rear of the room, the only area that seemed structurally intact, crawling past the fallen enforcer. I reached him just as he was trying to push a heavy, broken joist off his legs. "We have to move!" I yelled, grabbing his jacket collar. "They're here for the collateral." He stared at me, his eyes adjusting slowly to the faint light filtering in from the crash site. He clearly understood collateral meant the greenstone. He managed to wrench one leg free, grimacing in pain. "The van," he grunted, pointing toward the hole in the wall with his chin. "They're securing the perimeter. If we go out the front, we're pinned." "Then where?" He kicked at a low, rusted metal door tucked under the remaining staircase, a maintenance access, likely leading to the lower storage levels beneath the warehouse. Basement access. It should lead out to the old drainage culvert behind the building. The men from the van were now entering the main room, their flashlights dancing wildly. "Go, I'll cover you," the enforcer barked, finally managing to wrench himself free enough to grasp the shotgun. He swung it up, ignoring the obvious pain in his leg, and fired a deafening blast directly into the dust cloud where the attackers were emerging. The resulting explosion of sound in the enclosed space was agonizing. I didn't wait to hear the return fire or the outcome of the enforcer's desperate defense. I threw myself at the maintenance door, fumbling with the heavy deadbolt. It was rusted shut. I looked frantically around the debris. My eyes landed on a short, heavy piece of rebar that had snapped off a support column during the crash. I grabbed it, jammed the tip into the lock housing, and put every ounce of my remaining adrenaline into leveraging it. The metal shrieked in protest, and with a final, agonizing crack, the bolt snapped free. I tumbled through the opening, dropping down into pitch blackness and landing hard on wet, uneven ground. The drainage culvert. The stench of sewage and stagnant water was overwhelming, but it smelled better than gunpowder. I scrambled to my feet, the rebar still clutched in my hand, and started running blindly through the narrow tunnel, away from the sounds of combat erupting in the warehouse above. I could hear the heavy thump, thump, thump of the enforcer's shotgun fading behind me, punctuated now by rapid, heavier bursts of automatic fire. Definitely not from the bank's insurance assessors. These were professionals. I splashed through ankle-deep, icy water for what felt like an eternity, finally seeing a faint circle of moonlight ahead. I burst out of the culvert exit, gasping in the cold night air, collapsing onto the muddy bankyards away from the industrial park. I looked back. The warehouse was eerily quiet now. The only sound was the distant, mournful wail of approaching sirens, the real police, finally called by a neighbor who heard the crash. I checked my jacket pocket. The manila envelope was still there. I pulled it out, my hands shaking so violently I could barely unfold the paper Silas had given me. Inside, besides a hastily scribbled address, was a single blurry photograph. It was a picture of Mark. Not the polished digital strategist from LinkedIn, but Mark looking gaunt, terrified, sitting across a small table from a man whose face was entirely obscured by shadow, but whose wrist bore a heavy gold watch with an ornate, unmistakable crest engraved on the clasp. The same crest embossed on the outer cover of the sealed documents I was holding for Senator Reynolds' commission. The note written beneath the photo simply read, "The debt is tied to the contract." I had thought the crisis was about debt. Now I realized the crisis was about me, my craftsmanship, my reputation, and the priceless, politically explosive furniture I was building for a powerful man, which Mark had apparently used as leverage with criminals. I scrambled back toward my truck, desperate to get back to the shop, only to realize that in my flight through the sewers, I'd lost the key in the muck. And as the first distant sound of official police sirens grew louder, a new set of headlights cut sharply onto the road, leading toward the culvert exit. Not the official police cruiser, but a sleek, black car, driving with predatory slowness, its interior light momentarily flashing, revealing the familiar, grim profile of Senator Reynolds himself, looking directly toward the muddy bank where I stood, clutching the evidence of his secret dealings and my son's devastating failure. The senator's car stopped exactly at the mouth of the culvert, its headlights pinning me against the muddy embankment like an insect under glass. He didn't bother turning off the engine. The low rumble was a statement of control. Reynolds, usually immaculate, was wearing sunglasses despite the dead of night, a detail that spoke volumes about his current state of alarm. I scrambled backward, trying to hide the damning photo and the incriminating envelope under my muddy jacket. But it was useless. He was already out of the car, moving with a surprising, predatory grace for a man his age. "Arthur Davies," Reynolds said, his voice low, cultured, yet carrying a dangerous edge that eclipsed even the brute force of the men in the warehouse. "It seems you have misplaced more than just your keys tonight." He wasn't asking about the foreclosure or the emerald. He was asking about the photograph and the nature of the document I was supposed to be finishing by morning. "Senator," I managed, wiping mud from my eyes, "I can explain everything. This is a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Reynolds laughed, a dry, unpleasant sound. "My security detail alerted me that one of my primary contractors was found, visibly, at a scene involving known organized crime figures moments after my high-value custom order went missing from the workshop. You weren't supposed to be anywhere near that derelict site. You were supposed to be gluing dovetails." It clicked into place with sickening clarity. Mark hadn't just used the property as collateral, he'd leveraged my work. The furniture wasn't just furniture, it was a secure, custom-built container designed to hold sensitive data or materials for the senator, disguised as elegant veneer. The criminals Silas warned me about, the ones looking for the $1 million, were likely expecting to find that hidden asset. The creditors who showed up were probably just a smokescreen, a secondary layer of chaos to distract from the primary theft. "Where is the Reynolds cabinet?" Reynolds demanded, stepping closer. "The one designated Project Nightingale. I need it delivered, fully finished by sunrise, or I will not only ensure the bank takes your shop, but I will personally see to it that every piece of custom cabinetry you've ever made is seized as evidence in a federal money laundering investigation." I realized the emerald necklace, the family curse, was the only thing that could save me now, not by paying the debt, but by leveraging the only currency the powerful understand, leverage against an even greater threat. "Senator," I said, pulling out the manila envelope. I didn't take out the photo yet. "I don't have the cabinet finished, but I have something that explains why Mark was desperate enough to involve you and your associates." I slowly slid the photograph out, placing it on the hood of his expensive sedan, the wet, blurry image clearly showing Mark across from the man with the crested gold watch. This is who Mark was truly working for, the people who funded his AI startup. They're not interested in my carpentry, they're interested in this man's money, and I have the documentation showing that Marcus Vance funneled a large portion of your contracted payment, the payment for Project Nightingale, directly into this organization's accounts 3 months ago, disguised as a software investment. Reynolds froze. His perfectly composed exterior cracked. He snatched the photo, his gaze locked on the gold crest. "Impossible. That's Anton Volkov's crew. They're untouchable." "They are certainly dangerous," I agreed, allowing a tremor of fear into my voice. "And they believe Mark stole from them. If you seize my shop now to recover your cabinet, the Volkov organization, who are already looking for Mark, will assume you have him or that you have the assets he embezzled from them. They don't play nice with politicians, Senator. They don't send lawyers. They send demolition crews." I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. "I can still finish Nightingale by dawn. I have the tools. I have the skill. But only if you agree to 2 things. First, you call off your assessors immediately, and you halt the foreclosure paperwork. Second, you use whatever channels you have to make the Volkov organization believe that Mark Vance is dead or gone permanently, and that the only thing of value he left behind was this shop, which you are now purchasing outright for a nominal sum, say $1. Reynolds stared at the photo, his mind clearly calculating the political exposure versus the physical threat. Exposure was bad. Being linked to Volkov's operations was career suicide. The unfinished cabinet was an inconvenience. Being targeted by international criminals was an existential threat. "And the emerald?" he finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The emerald necklace stays with me," I countered. "It's my insurance policy against the creditors you scared away tonight, and it's the last piece of my family I have left. I use it to get a loan against the property tomorrow morning to stabilize the shop, and I pay back the loan within 30 days. You get your finished cabinet by sunrise, and your name stays clean regarding Project Nightingale." Reynolds stood there, the flashing headlights of the police cars beginning to illuminate the edge of the industrial park, the sirens growing louder, closer. He looked from the photograph to me, the old, dusty carpenter who suddenly held all the cards. He let out a sigh of pure exasperation, pulling off his sunglasses. "You are an unexpectedly shrewd negotiator, Davies. Very well. Sunrise. Nightingale must be perfect. And if I find so much as a single loose screw, I will regret sparing your life tonight." He tossed the photo back onto the hood of his car, pivoted, and climbed back into his vehicle. As the senator spun his car around, the beam of his taillight swept across the wreckage of the warehouse, revealing the enforcer, crawling out of the debris, bloody but alive, clutching the shotgun, staring blankly at the retreating senator. I knew the enforcer would be taken into custody, but Reynolds had bought me the time I needed. I looked down at the mud, finally seeing the glint of brass, my truck key. I picked it up, tasting victory that was as bitter as the sewage water. I had saved the shop, but I had done it by involving myself in a conspiracy that dwarfed a simple loan default. My son had failed, and in his failure, he had dragged me into a world of shadows I'd spent my entire life avoiding. I started sprinting back toward the warehouse, realizing I had to get to the enforcer before the police did, to ensure he kept silent about the Emerald, the Volkov organization, and Senator Reynolds. As I reached the crater where the front door used to be, I saw the police cruiser pulling up, its blue and red lights bathing the wreckage in a frantic strobe. Before I could even shout a word, a uniformed officer jumped out, weapon drawn, and pointed directly at me, shouting, "Freeze! Drop the weapon!" My heart seized. I was standing at the scene of an apparent mob shootout, holding a piece of rebar covered in mud and sewage, just moments after the senator, a major political figure, fled the scene, and my only ally was currently being apprehended. I looked down at the rebar in my hand, then back up at the officer's stern face, knowing that tonight, the dusty craftsman had been permanently recast as the prime suspect in a